General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. At 3:17 a.m. on January 15, 2025, our satellites detected 400 Chinese naval vessels moving toward Taiwan in formation. Intelligence confirmed President Xi had given the invasion order. We had 48 hours before the largest amphibious assault in human history would begin, and I had to brief President Biden on the most dangerous decision in American history: go to war with China or watch Taiwan fall. The invasion fleet that would trigger World War III had been assembling for 3 weeks under the cover of what Beijing called routine naval exercises. But at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time, our Pacific Fleet Command detected something that changed everything. The Chinese Armada was no longer conducting exercises. 400 naval vessels, including 12 aircraft carriers, 47 amphibious assault ships, and over 200 landing craft, had formed into invasion formations and were steaming directly toward Taiwan at maximum speed. The intelligence briefing I received 17 minutes later was the most terrifying document I had ever read. Chinese President Xi Jinping had issued what our sources inside the People's Liberation Army called Directive 47, the authorization for immediate invasion of Taiwan. The directive included timeline specifications that froze my blood. Chinese forces would establish beachheads on Taiwan's western coast within 48 hours, complete the occupation of Taipei within 72 hours, and present the world with a fait accompli before America could mount an effective military response. The scale of the Chinese operation was beyond anything our worst-case scenario planning had anticipated. Intelligence indicated that over 300,000 Chinese soldiers were aboard the invasion fleet, supported by 2,000 aircraft, 500 helicopters, and enough amphibious vehicles to land entire armored divisions simultaneously across multiple Taiwanese beaches. This wasn't just an invasion, it was the largest military operation since D-Day, designed to overwhelm Taiwanese defenses before international intervention was possible. President Biden's reaction when I called him at 3:47 a.m. was immediate and decisive. "General," his voice was hoarse with sleep but sharp with understanding, "tell me this is a drill." When I confirmed that Chinese invasion forces were 36 hours from Taiwan's beaches, the silence on the secure line lasted 15 seconds. Then, "I want every option on my desk in 2 hours. Every option, General. And I want to know if we can stop this without ending civilization." The National Security Council emergency meeting that convened at 5:30 a.m. was unlike anything in American history. We were facing a scenario that our strategic planners had hoped would never occur: direct military confrontation, with a nuclear superpower over territory that both sides considered vital to their survival. The intelligence picture was clear and terrifying. China was committed to invasion, and any American military response would trigger the largest conflict since World War II. The operational challenge was unprecedented. Taiwan was 6,800 miles from the nearest major American military base, while Chinese forces were launching their attack from bases less than 100 miles away. Our nearest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, was 400 miles southeast of Taiwan, and would require 18 hours to reach effective striking distance. Chinese forces would have established beachheads long before American naval power could intervene. But the most shocking intelligence came from our sources inside the Chinese military command. This invasion had been planned for 2 years, with operational details that revealed the extent of Chinese intelligence penetration of Taiwanese defenses. Chinese forces knew the exact location of every Taiwanese military installation, the precise timing of patrol schedules, and even the personal habits of Taiwanese commanders. The invasion plan was so detailed that it included street-by-street maps of Taipei and tactical assignments for individual buildings. The nuclear dimension of the crisis created paralysis at the highest levels of American government, intelligence, indicated that China had positioned intermediate-range nuclear missiles within striking distance of every American military base in the Pacific. If America intervened militarily to prevent the Taiwan invasion, China was prepared to escalate to nuclear warfare against American forces. The choice was stark: accept Chinese conquest of Taiwan or risk nuclear war that could kill millions. Secretary of State Blinken argued for immediate diplomatic intervention, suggesting that direct presidential communication with Xi Jinping might halt the invasion. CIA Director Burns presented intelligence showing that she had made the invasion decision personally and was not likely to be deterred by diplomatic pressure. Defense Secretary Austin warned that American military intervention would require capabilities that could take weeks to position effectively. The breakthrough in our crisis planning came from an unexpected source. Admiral John Aquilino, commander of Indo-Pacific Command, had been secretly positioning American forces for exactly this scenario. For 6 months, he had been moving submarines, aircraft, and special operations forces into positions that would allow immediate response to Chinese aggression. The admiral's foresight had created military options that would otherwise have been impossible. Mr. President, Admiral Aquilino reported via secure video link, "We have 18 attack submarines within striking distance of the Chinese invasion fleet. We have 200 combat aircraft positioned at bases in Japan, Guam, and the Philippines. We cannot stop the invasion, but we can make it so costly that China will reconsider the strategic value of continuing the operation." The tactical plan that emerged from 6 hours of intensive planning was designated Operation Dragon's Gate, a coordinated submarine and air assault designed to inflict maximum casualties on Chinese invasion forces while they were most vulnerable. During the amphibious landing phase, the operation would target Chinese landing craft, troop transports, and command vessels, turning Taiwan's beaches into killing zones that would demonstrate the cost of Chinese aggression. But Operation Dragon's Gate carried risks that extended far beyond immediate military casualties. Chinese military doctrine called for immediate nuclear retaliation against any attack on mainland Chinese territory. Our intelligence assessment concluded that if American forces sank enough Chinese ships, Xi Jinping would authorize nuclear strikes against American military bases in the Pacific. The operation, designed to save Taiwan, could trigger nuclear war that would devastate the region. The authorization decision came at 11:47 a.m., exactly 8 hours after we had detected the Chinese invasion fleet. President Biden, surrounded by his senior national security advisors, made the decision that would determine whether America went to war with China. General Milley, "You are authorized to execute Dragon's Gate. We will not allow the conquest of Taiwan, whatever the cost." The implementation of Operation Dragon's Gate began at 12:15 p.m. with the deployment of American attack submarines toward intercept positions with the Chinese invasion fleet. 18 Virginia-class submarines, armed with Mark 48 torpedoes and Tomahawk cruise missiles, began converging on coordinates that would place them directly in the path of Chinese invasion forces. The submarines had 18 hours to reach attack positions before Chinese forces would be within striking distance of Taiwan simultaneously. American air assets throughout the Pacific began launching toward Taiwan. F-22 Raptor fighters from Japan, B-2 Spirit bombers from Guam, and F-35 Lightning II aircraft from the Philippines were converging on the Taiwan Strait with enough firepower to devastate the Chinese invasion fleet. The Air Armada represented the largest concentration of American combat power since the Gulf War. The intelligence that emerged as Operation Dragon's Gate unfolded revealed the true sophistication of Chinese planning. Beijing had anticipated American submarine response and had positioned their own attack submarines in defensive formations around the invasion fleet. The underwater battle that would determine Taiwan's fate would involve over 50 submarines from both sides. fighting in waters that would become the most dangerous naval battlefield since World War II. The first contact between American and Chinese forces occurred at 2:33 p.m. when the USS Virginia detected Chinese submarines escorting the invasion fleet. The American submarine commander faced a decision that would determine whether the crisis escalated to shooting war, engage the Chinese submarines and trigger immediate military conflict, or maintain surveillance and allow the invasion to proceed, unopposed. Dragon Base. This is Virginia, the submarine commander reported over encrypted communications. I have multiple Chinese attack submarines in escort formation, requesting permission to engage. The response from Pacific Fleet Command was immediate. Virginia, you are weapons free. Engage, at will. The torpedo attack that began the Third World War was launched at 2:47 p.m. when USS Virginia fired for Mark 48 torpedoes at Chinese submarine contacts. The Chinese response was immediate and devastating. Coordinated torpedo attacks against American submarines that had been tracking the invasion fleet for hours. Within 15 minutes, 3 American submarines and 2 Chinese submarines had been destroyed in underwater combat that neither side could afford to lose. The surface battle began at 3:15 p.m. when American aircraft reached the Chinese invasion fleet. The sight that confronted American pilots was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. 400 Chinese vessels spread across 200 square miles of ocean, loaded with enough troops and equipment to conquer an entire nation. The attack orders were specific. Target troop transports and landing craft. Avoid command vessels that might trigger nuclear escalation. The air battle that followed was unlike anything in modern warfare. Chinese fighter aircraft from the invasion fleet engaged American attackers in dogfights that ranged across the Taiwan Strait. Surface-to-air missiles from Chinese destroyers created deadly gauntlets that American pilots had to navigate to reach their targets. The sky above the invasion fleet became a three-dimensional battlefield, where split-second decisions determined survival. The first major success of Operation Dragon's Gate came at 4:22 p.m., when American submarines successfully torpedoed 7 Chinese troop transports, sending over 15,000 invasion troops to the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. The psychological impact of these losses on Chinese invasion planning was immediate and severe. Chinese commanders began requesting permission to abort the invasion, rather than accept catastrophic casualties. But the Chinese response escalated the crisis beyond anything our planners had anticipated. At 4:45 p.m., Chinese intermediate ballistic missiles struck American air bases in Japan and Guam, destroying aircraft and killing American personnel. The attacks were precise and devastating, designed to demonstrate Chinese resolve, while providing justification for continued escalation. President Biden's reaction to the Chinese missile strikes was swift and decisive. They have attacked American sovereign territory, he announced during an emergency National Security Council meeting. This is an act of war. General Milley, you are authorized to respond with all necessary force. The escalation that followed would bring to nuclear superpowers to the brink of mutual annihilation. American Tomahawk cruise missiles struck Chinese naval bases along the Taiwan Strait, destroying port facilities and sinking ships in harbor. Chinese retaliation included ballistic missile attacks against American naval vessels in the Pacific, sinking 2 destroyers and damaging an aircraft carrier. The nuclear dimension of the crisis reached critical point at 7:33 p.m. when Chinese President Xi Jinping activated the People's Liberation Army rocket force, placing China's nuclear arsenal on highest alert. American intelligence detected the activation within minutes, triggering automatic protocols that placed American nuclear forces on equivalent alert status. Both superpowers were now positioned for nuclear exchange that could occur within 15 minutes of either leader's decision. The communication that prevented nuclear war came at 8:47 p.m. through the Moscow-Washington hotline. Russian President Putin, horrified by the prospect of nuclear exchange between China and America, offered to mediate immediate ceasefire negotiations. Both Beijing and Washington, recognizing that continued escalation led inevitably to nuclear warfare, agreed to temporary suspension of military operations. The 48th Hour Taiwan crisis ended not with Chinese victory or American success, but with recognition that modern warfare between nuclear superpowers was too dangerous to continue. Both sides had demonstrated their willingness to fight for Taiwan, but neither was prepared to risk civilization for territorial control. The immediate aftermath of the crisis revealed casualties that shocked both military establishments. Over 40,000 Chinese personnel had been killed or wounded during the invasion attempt. American losses included 12 naval vessels, 37 aircraft, and over 2,000 military personnel. The brief conflict had produced casualties comparable to major battles of World War II. The strategic consequences of the Taiwan crisis extended far beyond immediate military losses. China's failed invasion demonstrated that American military capabilities remained sufficient to prevent Chinese territorial expansion. America's willingness to risk nuclear war for Taiwan sent clear signals about American commitment to Pacific allies. The intelligence analysis that followed the crisis revealed that both sides had underestimated the other's resolve and capabilities. Chinese planners had believed that American nuclear risk aversion would prevent military intervention. American strategists had not anticipated Chinese willingness to escalate to nuclear threats over Taiwan. The technological lessons learned from the Taiwan crisis influenced military planning for both superpowers. The effectiveness of submarine warfare, the vulnerability of surface ships to modern missiles, and the speed at which conflicts could escalate to nuclear dimensions, all required fundamental revisions to military doctrine. The diplomatic revolution that followed the crisis led to new agreements designed to prevent similar confrontations. Both China and America recognized that Taiwan's status required negotiated resolution rather than military solution. The crisis had demonstrated that war between nuclear superpowers was too dangerous to be an acceptable policy option. The regional impact of the Taiwan crisis affected every nation in the Pacific. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines realized that their security depended on preventing future confrontations between China and America. Australia and India began developing independent military capabilities that would reduce their dependence on superpower protection. The economic consequences of the 48-hour conflict were immediate and global. Stock markets crashed, shipping routes were disrupted, and international trade ground to a halt as investors recognized the fragility of peace between the world's two largest economies. The crisis demonstrated that modern warfare between major powers would have economic consequences affecting every nation on Earth. The psychological impact on military personnel who participated in the Taiwan crisis was profound and lasting. Pilots who had engaged in combat, knowing that nuclear war might begin at any moment, experienced forms of combat stress that had no precedent in military medicine. Submarine crews who had fought underwater battles while civilization hung in the balance required specialized psychological support. Closing reflection: the 48-hour Taiwan crisis taught us that in an age of nuclear weapons and global economic interdependence, traditional concepts of military victory are obsolete. Neither China nor America could achieve their objectives through force without risking consequences that would dwarf any possible gains. The courage of American military personnel, who engaged Chinese forces while knowing that nuclear escalation was possible, represents the finest traditions of military service. They fought not for conquest, but for principle, demonstrating that democratic values are worth defending even against overwhelming odds. Viewer engagement: if this fictional story revealed something you didn't know about modern superpower conflict and nuclear escalation risks, Make sure to subscribe for more classified military revelations about the decisions that could determine humanity's future. I want to hear your thoughts on two critical questions. Question 1. Do you think America was right to risk nuclear war to prevent Chinese invasion of Taiwan? Or should we have accepted Chinese fait accompli to avoid global catastrophe? Question 2. If you were in my position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, would you have recommended military intervention, knowing it could trigger nuclear war? Or would you have advised diplomatic acceptance of Taiwan's conquest? Drop your answers in the comments below. I read every response, and your insights help shape future stories about the impossible decisions that military leaders face when defending freedom. Requires risking civilization. Remember, these are the kinds of classified operations that happen when superpowers collide over vital interests. The real decisions that protect democratic values often involve risks that most people cannot imagine. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never forget that freedom's survival depends on people willing to make the ultimate sacrifice when civilization itself is at stake.